Today's shiur begins at the second line from the top of Daf Samach Beis. On the side of our marked Gemaras, you'll notice the Nosei heading, Nosei the topic heading, and we've written Hukpulu Rov Hamiktzos. Once the majority of the knives used for harvesting figs and for cutting the fig cakes after they've been harvested, once those knives have been folded up, so we learned at the end of our previous shiur that the figs that remain in the fields are mutaros mishum gezel. They are allowed for the general public, and there's no problem of theft in taking them, and pturos min hamaiser, and there is no obligation to tithe them, because at that point, once it's hukpuru rov hamikzoyos, mikzos being those special knives for cutting the fig cakes, once they've been put away, the majority have been put away, the remaining figs in the field are considered hefker, they're considered unowned, and therefore no tithing obligation. Where today's shiur picks up, you see the double underline and triangle used. These are both series markings, and under the mivneh heading, you can see we've referred to maisim. There are incidents, stories, im rabbonim, be'inyan achila bizman shukpelu rov hamiktzos, concerning eating of the figs from the fields at this time once the majority of the knives have been folded up. And as we indicated before, at this point in time, we assume that the owners of the fig trees have given up on collecting any remnant, any remaining figs. So the double underline, as you skim down the page, you'll notice highlights names, and the triangle highlights the beginning of the incident. So we continue now in the Gemara. Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi, Bar Rabbi Yehuda, Iklu Lahu Asra. Both Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi went to a particular place. Bizman Shuklu Rov Hamiktzos, at a time when the majority of the harvesting knives, or the knives used for cutting the fig cakes, have been folded up. Rebbe have ko'ochil. Rebbe ate from the remaining figs in the fields. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, lo ochil. Rabbi Yossi did not. Also Marehon, the owner of the fig trees, came, saw them. Amar lahu amai lo achli rabbanan. Why aren't you eating hukpulu rov hamikzosu? Don't you realize that it's late in the season and that most of the mikzos have been folded up? The afalpikain lo ochel Rabbi Yossi, and even though the owner declared what he declared, Rabbi Yossi did not want to partake of those figs. Kosovar, Rabbi Yossi figured mishum sanyus milsa hu dekomar hodain gavra. This man was making his offer, but in a sarcastic fashion. Rashi says, Mishum Sanyas Milsa, third line from the top, Klomar, me ro'a leiv hoy omer kain. Out of a stingy heart, he said thusly, V'lo mishum ayin yofa, not because of any feeling of graciousness, da'adayin lo hifkiron, as far as he was concerned, that particular owner, he had not declared them unowned as of yet. The Gemara continues, Rebbe Chamo bar Rebbe Chanina, Iklo lahu asra, Bizman shehukbelu rov hamiktzos. Reb Chama arrived at a certain place at that time. Havikochil, and he took from the figs left in the fields. Yoiv l'shame loachil. He presented some to his servant, the shame his servant, and the servant exercised greater restraint, maybe greater piety, and he did not eat from those figs. Omar le echol. Kach Omar li Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Chama says, eat from them. Thusly Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi told me, Mishum Aviv, in the name of his father, namely in the name of Rabbi Yossi. Hukbulu rov hamiktzos, mutoros mishum gezel, ufturos min hamaiser. That once the majority of the knives have been folded up, then there is no problem in terms of gezel, nor is there any problem in terms of needing to tithe. Rabbi Tarfon, and here we have an incident that is quite profound, as you'll see, quite dramatic. Rabbi Tarfon ashkichei hahu gavra bizman shuplu hamiktzos de ka'ochil. That means that Rabbi Yossi was found by a certain man at a time when the Hukpulu Hamiktos, and this man found Rabbi Tarfon eating from the figs. Achte besako v'shakle, this man grabbed Rabbi Tarfon and bagged him. He put him in a sack, and he carried Rabbi Tarfon off in the sack, lemishte benara, to throw Rabbi Tarfon into the river. Omar, Rabbi Tarfon screamed out, Oy lo letarfon shezeh horgo, woe unto Tarfon, woe unto myself, that this guy is going to kill me. Shoma ugavro shapke gorak, the man heard that he had Rabbi Tarfon in the bag. Rabbi Tarfon was a great rabbinic figure. He heard that, and he left him in Orak and ran away. Omar Rabbi Avo mishum Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel. Rabbi Avo tells us that Kol Yom of Shel Oisei Tzadik, all the years of Rabbi Tarfon from that incident onwards, Hoya Mitztayer al Dover Zeh, he was upset about his conduct concerning this matter. Omar Oili Shenishtamashti B'Kisra Shel Torah. Woe unto me that I used the crown of Torah to save myself. In other words, by mentioning my name, Tarfon, so he understood that a great rabbi was in the sack, and this guy was about to kill him, and by mentioning his name, he invoked the crown of Torah for his salvation. Anyone who uses the crown of Torah for his own benefit, for his own personal benefit, is uprooted from the world. And so you can understand that Rabbi Tarfon was very concerned. Now, the obvious questions regarding this story will be dealt with as the Gemara unfolds. Now, the last point, that one who's mishtamish b'kisrul Torah is neker min olam, this is derived through kal v'chomer logic. Kal v'chomer, and we have a long marking indicating the extent of the logic. The Gemara begins with a reference to a monarch from the Babylonian area who used the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. Belshazzar's by name, Belshazzar is the name of that monarch. His predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had conquered Israel and destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, and his successor Belshazzar used the Beis Hamikdash vessels for his personal entertainment. And Gemara says as follows: Uma Belshazzar, mind you, Belshazzar shenishtamesh beklei kodesh shenasu choil. He used the holy vessels that, technically speaking, had lost their sanctity. So his use of them wasn't a violation of the letter of the law. They were no longer really sanctified. And just skip the brackets initially. Ne'ekar min olam. He was cast out of this world. Skip the brackets again momentarily. Hamishtamesh b'kisra shel Torah shehu kayam liolam alachas kama v'kama. One who uses the crown of Torah, which doesn't lose its sanctity, it remains in its exalted position all the time. All the more so would one be deserving of ne'ekar min olam, being cast out of the world. Now we read this kal v'chomer, skipping the sources for each point. So let's go over the Gemara now, reading the sources. So we mentioned that Belshazzar, who used the clay kodesh, shenasu choil. What do we mean by that? That the holy vessels of the Beis Hamikdash became mundane. Shenemar, the pasuk says as follows: Uvo bo pritzim v'chiluluha. Pritzim are the intruders. Come and they chiluluha. What does that mean for us? Kevon shepartsum, once the invaders broke into the temple, nasu chol, the vessels that were there became common. And here you have Belshazzar using vessels that essentially are not holy. Ne'ekar min olam, and he was uprooted from the world. He was killed. The pasuk says, Bo belelia kotil Belshazzar. That very night that he entertained himself with the Beis Hamikdash vessels, he was killed. One who uses the crown of Torah, and this is what was bothering Rabbi Tarfon above, for one's own purposes, one's self-aggrandizement, all the more so, is destined to being ne'akar min olam, uprooted from the world. The Gemara asks the most obvious question about this whole incident. For Rabbi Tarfon, Kevon dechi ochil tukbulurov amiktzos have, Rabbi Tarfon, who was eating from the figs at a point in time that most of the fig knives had been folded up for safekeeping till the next season. Amai Tzareo Gavra, why did that man upset? Why did he capture Rabbi Tarfon? Rabbi Tarfon wasn't doing anything wrong. Answer: Mishum dahavu ganvi lei invi kule shasa. The man who bagged Rabbi Tarfon was a man from whom there were thieves stealing his grapes throughout the year. They came at Ashkeli Rabbi Tarfon. When he saw Rabbi Tarfon in the area, Savar Hainu the Gan, when he figured, there's the thief. Once Rabbi Tarfon was grabbed as a thief, and it was all a frame, or all a mistake, why was he upset? Why was Rabbi Tarfon so upset? What else could he have done? He had to save himself. Answer: Mishum de Rabbi Tarfon Osher Godol Have. Rabbi Tarfon was a very wealthy man. And he should have appeased the man who captured him. He should have appeased him with money. He should have simply said, "Let me go and I'll give you a lot of money. It's worth your letting me go." Instead of citing his name, which in effect was invoking the Torah merit in order to achieve his own salvation. Tanya, and we have a Tanaic source that deals with this general topic. Lavo es Hashem Elokecha l'shmo b'kolu u'l'dov kabo. That is a posuk in Dvarim where we are expected to love the Almighty, heed His voice, and cling unto Him. Shelo yoimar odam, a person should not reason or figure, Ekra, I'm going to learn psukim, I'm going to learn the Tanakh, Shikruuni Chacham, that as a result of that, people will call me by an honorable title, the Chacham, the wise man. Eshne, Sheazokin Veshev Yeshiva, or a person should not reason that I'm going to learn Mishnah, I'm going to learn Torah Sheba'al Peh, I'm going to learn the oral tradition, that I be a scholar, a sage, and be able to sit in yeshiva, to sit in, we'll say, leadership, in a Torah leadership capacity. All these two descriptions are people who would be engaged in Torah study for some type of personal gain. Ella, rather, lemoid me'ava, learn out of love. Love of Hashem, love of His Torah, love of His mitzvos, the sof hakovod lavo, and the honor that so concerned this individual before will come anyway. Shneimar, the pasuk says regarding Torah, koshreim al etzboisecha, kosveim al luach libecha. Literally, tie them around your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. V'omer dorachel dochei noam, v'omer eitz chaim hila machzikim ba, v'samcheho meushar. The ways of the Torah, ways of pleasantness, and the Torah is like a tree of life, that those who support the Torah, and certainly those who support the Torah through the study of Torah, will be me'ushar, will be strengthened, will be honored. Reb Eliezer Reb Tzadok Omer, asay dvarim l'shem pa'olam, do things for the sake of the Almighty. The daber bohem lishmam, and speak, converse in Torah study for their sake. Al tasei mator lizgadol bohem, do not make them as a crown for your own self-aggrandizement. The al tasei kordun lios olderbo, and do not learn Torah as a means, for the sole purpose of using it as literally a kardom, as a gardening tool, an agricultural tool used for turning over, for aerating the soil. That's oder bo, which for our purposes mean do not approach the Torah, do not use Torah study as a means of enriching yourself. The kal v'chomer, and we can apply the kal v'chomer logic that we saw earlier. Mind you, Baal Shetzer, who used the formerly holy vessels, which had in the meantime become mundane, but he used them for his own purposes, for his own entertainment. He was uprooted from the world. One who uses the crown of Torah for self-gain, all the more so, he has what to worry about. The threat of being nekar min ha'olam. As we continue in the Gemara, we have some markings, and on the side we have the house shape highlights Rava, and the double underline, you'll see, highlights the expression shori lay, etc. Shori lay in this case will mean it is permissible for, and we have to fill in permissible what as we go on in the Gemara. And we note under our topic heading, Sidra Shel Memra Shel Rav, we have a series of statements made by Rava. What is allowed for a Torah scholar to say? What is he allowed to say about himself, about his Torah learning? The piece of Gemara here appears in the context of the previous sugya about how it's prohibited to use the crown of Torah for your own self-gain. So now we continue in the Gemara. Omar Rava, Shori Leili Inish, it is permissible for a person, Lo Doye Nafshe, to make himself known, and we're talking about someone who is a Torah scholar, so he's letting people know that he is a Torah scholar. But Asra de Lo Yadi Le, in a place where people simply do not know him. He's unknown in this particular place. And as such, he is allowed to make himself known by saying, I am a Torah scholar. The Rosh adds, most importantly, at the bottom line of the Rosh commentary, so that people will not disparage this man who represents the Torah, and if they do end up embarrassing or disparaging such a person, they will be subject to punishment. So for the sake of the protection of the public, it's important for a person in a place that he's not known to let people know, you should know I'm a Torah scholar. Dichtiv v'avdecha yiras Hashem minu rav. This is a pasuk where the prophet, where Ovadia informs Eliyahu, who didn't know him, and so the prophet speaks about himself as, I am a God-fearing man from my youth. Oh, so one is allowed to inform people about his Torah scholarship. Then why was Rabbi Tarfon so upset when that's in effect what he did? The Gemara answers, because in the case of Rabbi Tarfon, he had a better alternative. Not everyone has the alternative that Rabbi Tarfon had. Mishum de'ashir godel hoya, he was a very wealthy man. He should have appeased his adversary, his oppressor, with money. That would have been the best. That would have been the best thing to do, of course, if you have that ability. If not, then, as we said, you are allowed to let people know who don't know you that you're a Torah scholar. Rava Rami. Rava raises what appears to be a contradiction. Ksiv, on the one hand, it says, V'avdecha yiras Hashem minu rav. the Novi says, the prophet says about himself, I am a God-fearing man from my youth. In other words, he's praising himself. Uksiv, and yet another pasuk says, Yalu chazar v'lo picha, let others praise you. Zar means strangers, means outsiders, others other than yourself, let them praise you, not your own mouth praise yourself. So the Gemara resolves this. Haba asra diyadile. One is in a place that you are known, so there's no need for your self-praise. Let others praise you. Haba asra delo yadile. In a place that you're not known, so there, as we said before, you are entitled to let your status be known. Omar Rava. Shari le litzum rabbanan lemeimar. It is permissible for a Torah scholar to say, Tzubu mirabanan ano. I am a Torah scholar, and therefore Sharuli Tigroi Beresha, that in the event that I have, let's say, a case that needs to be dealt with, and there are other people that also have a case, a court case, a legal case that needs to be heard, solve my case. Sharuli Tigroi means solve my controversy, my case first. Diftiv, and this idea of when you have let's say two cases coming to you simultaneously, you have to choose which one to handle first, which one to settle first, and one of the two cases coming in front of you involves a Torah scholar. You are to deal with the Torah scholar first to free him up and enable him to go back to his Torah study. And now this idea is learned from the following: Dichtiv uvnei David kayanim hoyu. And it says now here, literally, we translate the sons of David, King David, were Kayhanim. Well, that's not true. V'chi Kayhanim Hoyu were the sons of David Kayhanim. David was from the tribe of Yehuda. So why does the pasuk describe the sons of David as Kayhanim? Ela Ma'kayin noitel barosh af Talmud Chacham notel barosh. Rather, there's a comparison or an analogy made between the sons of David, who the Ran points out they were chachomim, they were scholars, and as a result of their Torah scholarship, they have we'll say the same type of law applies to them that would apply to Kehanim. What applies to Kehanim? So when you have, let us say, food, let us say, to be distributed, or honors to be distributed, the Kohen is the first one to receive. You are to offer to the Kohen first. He has first takes, if you will, first grabs. So we say, just like the Kohen takes first, so too the Talmud Chacham also is dealt with first, takes first, or as we said before, his case is dealt with first. The Kohen Menalon, and regarding the Kohen, from where do we know that idea? We have a pasuk referring to the Kohanim. It says, "You shall sanctify him, for he offers the sacrifices of the public to the Almighty." That is the same word from the pasuk. Whenever there's a matter of, let's say, holiness or prioritization regarding matters of kedusha, of holiness, the Kohen is to be featured, given precedence. The Gemara continues at the top of Omid Beis. Liftoyach Rishon, Ulevorech Rishon, V'litomona Yofa Rishon. The meaning of these different expressions, you can look into the Meforshim for more elaboration, but in the meantime we take the Rashi simple pshat is, Liftoach Rishon is to get the first aliyah to the Torah. Levorech Rishon, Rashi says, Bebirchas hamoitzi birchas hamazon, to lead in the opening bracha for bread, where you have a group of people that are assembled, so he leads in the bread bracha, and he will lead in the birchas hamazon, the bracha after the meal. That's Levorech Rishon, and Litol Mona Yofa Rishon. The Rashi says that when there would be a distribution of food, so he is to get the first portion. This last point regarding the first portion at a meal, you can see is highlighted in the Rosh commentary. The Gemara continues, Omar Rava, Shori Le L'Tzuber Rabbanan L'Meimar. It is permissible for a Torah scholar to say, Lo Yahivna Akarga. I don't want to pay this tax. A karga is a head tax. Dichtiv, the pasuk says, this pasuk is basically an Aramaic pasuk. The Gemara will explain the key words of this pasuk afterwards. The pasuk reads, Minda blo v'halach lo shalit lemirma alehon. The Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Minda zu monas hamelach. Minda is a type of tax upon the people. It is a portion given to the king. Below zu kesef gulgolta. That's a head tax. V'halach zu arnona. It's another type of tax. The Ran explains what it is in detail, but in the pasuk that we read, Minda, below, v'haloch, 3 different types of taxes, says lo shalit lemirma alehon. They are not that; those taxes are not to be levied upon them, and that's a reference to Talmidei Chachamim. So that Talmidei Chachamim are not obligated to pay these kind of taxes. There's more on this topic in the first parak of Bava Basra as to why that is. But for our purposes, Rava tells us that a person can say, I am a Talmud Chacham, with the expectation of being exempt from these taxes. It is permissible for a Torah scholar to say, and here we have a very difficult line, and I say difficult line if you adopt the Rashi approach to it. The Ran approach is a little more palatable, but here we go. It is mutter for a Talmud Chacham to say, Avda denura ano lo yahivna akarga. Rashi says, Avda denura means nura is fire. Avda would mean a slave or a servant of the fire. And look what Rashi says, Eved shel avidis kechavim plonis ani. I am a servant of a particular idol. Ve'eni roiseli mas. And now nura shem avidis kechavim. It would almost sound as if Rashi is saying that a person can say, in order to save himself from this tax, these fire worshippers were exempt from the karga tax. So, according to Rashi, and maybe you can debate this explanation within Rashi, but he's saying, I am the servant of this particular avodas kavim. Saying I'm the servant of almost sounds like saying I worship this particular idol, and people who were servants of the idol would be exempt from the tax. The Ran, and here is a much more comfortable pshat. The Ran says, Avda denura no eved leish shehu koyen le'ovdei ha'esh. I am a slave or a servant of a man who is a worshipper, who is a priest to this particular idol, to the fire worshippers. She'avadav, his servants, the servants of those who function as priests to the idol, they are p'turim mikarga. They are exempt from the karga tax. The Ran goes on to say, this is not someone who concedes, who acknowledges the idol. It's obvious to Lo Amar Hachi, his description of himself as I am a servant I am an Avda Denura. This idea is, he said it only Elafturi Mikagi, did it with the specific purpose of exempting himself from a tax. And when the Torah says, that was when the Gemara says it's mutar for Tzum Rabbanon to do this, Rabu Sukamar, son is a big chiddush. Dafil Tzum Rabbanon, even a Talmud Chacham, Shari Le Lemeimar Hachi, Dehain Svurin Lavinis Kechavim, Vahu Libo L'Shamayim. The listeners, the tax people, the government authorities will think that he's acknowledging the idol, but not so. His heart is to heaven. By making reference to the fire, the Almighty Kiviyachol is described as a consuming fire. So he's saying, I serve the fire, and he is thinking the whole time, the Almighty. Now, why is this allowed? My taima, answer lavruche arya mine komar. This is allowed because his intention simply is to chase away a lion, the lion being the government who's seeking taxes from him. So he's trying to chase away the lion. Nothing more, nothing intentional by way of idolatry, and hence we can be lenient. Rav Ashi Havele Hahu Iba. Rav Ashi had a forest. Zavne Lebei Nura. He sold the forest, which represents a lot of trees, and trees represents fuel for fires. So Rav Ashi had a forest, and he sold it. Zavne Lebei Nura. He sold it to we'll call it a fire church. Omar le Ravina Rav Ashi oikol ifnei iver lo sitei michshol. By you're selling them the trees, you're in effect supplying them with fuel for the fire that they worship. Is that not a problem of lifnei iver lo sitei michshol? The Torah exhortation not to place a stumbling block in front of the blind, which for our purposes means how is it that you can possibly help them in their sin? Amalei, Rav Ashi answers, Roiv Eitzim Lahasaka Nitnu. Most trees, most wood sources are used for heating, for light, not for worship. And therefore, I can rationalize, or I can legitimatize or justify my sale of the forest, albeit to fire worshippers, but fire worshippers also need cooking fuel and lighting, and therefore they'll be using it for heter purposes, for allowed reasons, and therefore I'm not guilty of lifnei iver lo sitei michshol. We continue with the topics that we've been dealing with in the last couple of dapim. Person makes a vow, thereby imposing some type of self-imposed restriction, and he says, Ad HaKotzir, I'm accepting upon myself this restriction until the Kotzir, until the harvest. What does that mean time-wise? Ad Shiaschul Liktzor, until it means that whatever you've accepted upon yourself as being forbidden, it's until the nation starts to harvest. Ktsir chitim, avalok ktsir sorim, until they start harvesting wheat. Wheat's harvested a little later than barley, so even though they may have started to harvest barley, that's not considered ad HaKotzir, because ad HaKotzir is determined by when people begin the wheat harvest. Hakol lefi mokom nidro. Everything is dependent on where you made the vow. Im hoya bahar, if you're located in a high altitude location on a mountain, so it's based on the harvest of wheat on mountains. Im hoya babika, and if you lived in a valley, babika, so it would be according to the time of year in which they would start harvesting wheat in valleys. If a person said, Ad HaGeshamim, or Ad Shiu HaGeshamim, he used one of these expressions. He vows, let us say, not to drink wine until the Geshamim, until the rain. What does that mean? Ad Shetered Revia Shnia, until the season's second major rainfall. Rav Shimon Leomer, Ad Shiagia Zmano Shel Revia. Rav Shimon says until the expected time of the second major rainfall arrives. So according to Shimon Leomer, it doesn't seem to the idea of Ad HaGeshamim doesn't necessitate the actual precipitation, just as long as the time of that expected second rainfall arrives. Ad Shifsiku Geshamim. Ad Sheyetze Nisan Kulo. That expression, the vows not to drink wine. Ad Sheyifsiku Geshamim, until the rain stops. That would mean until the entire month of Nisan goes by. Divrei Rebbe Meir. That's Rebbe Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ad Sheyavor Pesach. The idea of Ad Sheyifsiku Geshamim doesn't not take in the whole month of Nisan, but rather until the passage of the holiday of Pesach. Pesach, of course, is celebrated from the middle of Nisan plus 7 days. Tanya, Hanoider Ad HaKayitz Bagolil. A person accepted upon himself some type of restriction of whatever, but he mentioned Ad HaKayitz, and he made the vow when he was in the Golil, the northern section of Israel. V'yorad lamokim, and then he went down into the depths. He went into valleys. In the valleys, the harvest season arrives earlier. So even though the harvest season arrived there in the Amokim, also the man who vowed not to benefit from something, and he said until the Kayetz in Golil, so he is forbidden until that later date. even though he's currently found in the Amokim, where the Kayetz has already arrived. Person says, Ad HaGshamim, Ad Shiu Geshamim. What is the practical application of that? Ad Shetei Revia Shnia, until the second major rainfall occurs. Rav Shmuel Omer, Ad Shigia Zmano Shel Revia. And of course, we saw this in the Mishnah. This is a quote from the Mishnah. Omar Rabbi Zera, Machlokes Domar Ad HaGeshamim. The machlokes between the Tanakama and Rav Shmuel Leo is if he used that expression, Ad HaGeshamim. However, Aval Omar Ad HaGeshem, Ad Zman Geshamim Ka'omar. And that means until the time for the rainfall to happen. Here we have a problem that is so it's a recurring problem for us when learning the Nedarim, is that the reference to Geshamim, by having used the term Ad HaGeshem until the time of Geshamim, which time of Geshamim is referred to? So Rashi makes reference to the first rainfall of the season. The Ran, on this very point, mentions Ad Shigia Zman Revia Shnia, until the arrival of the time that you would ordinarily expect the second rainfall to happen. But as far as Rabbi Zera is concerned, the statement of Ad HaGeshem is not a controversial point between the Tanoim. They both agree that the reference is to an expected time and not an actual rainfall. Gemara raises a question, and this question continues on the top of Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Note that it's a long question. Meisvei. He quoted a Tanaic source that you also find in Maseches Tainis, the tractate that deals with droughts and how to deal with them spiritually. Meisvei, Ezu Zmano Shel Revia. What is the time of the Revia, the rainfall? Revia is a reference to a rainfall. Habachira begimel beinanes b'shiva afela be'esrim u'shloshetim Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir's opinion is that the first rainfall is on the 3rd of Cheshvan, the second on the 7th, and the third on the 23rd of Cheshvan. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he has different dates for these three rainfalls. B'shiva, b'shivaso, b'esrim u'shlosha, 7, 17, and 23rd of the month of Cheshvan. It may be noteworthy that regarding the last rainfall, both the Tanakama, that's Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, agree the 23rd of Cheshvan. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he has the latest dates, B'shiva Asar, U'be'esrim U'shlosha, U'b'chodesh Kislev. 17th, 23rd, both of Cheshvan, and first day of Kislev. Rabbi Yossi says that the rule concerning fasting as a result of lack of rainfall kicks in only once you reach Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and at that point only the Yechidim, or the Talmidei Chachamim, they would start a series of fasts, but that would start only Rosh Chodesh Kislev. V'amrinon Allah, and concerning this source that made reference to an initial rainfall, a middle rainfall, and a late rainfall. So we say Bishlama Revia Rishona, the value, the purpose of knowing the date of the first rainfall, Lishael. That's at that point we know to insert in the Shmona Esrei the special phrase or portion that involves the request of rain. So when that date comes, that tells us start requesting rain in your prayers, specifically in the Shemona Esrei. Shlishis, the third rainfall, lis anois, for knowing when to start the public fasting. We saw in the source that the initial fasters would be the Talmidei Chachamim, but it has to do with what eventually will turn into a public fast. So that accounts for the reason for knowing the date of a first rainfall and for the third rainfall. Elo shnia lamai. What's the purpose of the second rainfall, assigning a date for the second rainfall. V'yomar Rebbe Zera l'noder. It has to do with people who vow. And the ikr, the main thing you don't see in the words, but we've written it between the lines, that when Rabbi Zera says that the shnia is for noder, it seems to say even for someone who vowed ad hageshem. V'amrinon Allah keman az lahadasanya, and we ask who would be the author, or like whom does the following Tanaic source go? Reb Shimon Oimer kishamu shiadu shiva yomim ze'achar zeh. If you have 7 days of consecutive rainfall, you can count them as the Revia Rishona and the Revia Shnia. And we say Keman, Rabbi Yossi. This follows the teaching of Rabbi Yossi. Before we get to the heart of the question, let us just explain this last calculation. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said that if you have rainfall for 7 consecutive days, you count it as the first and second rainfall. If you notice the dates above for the various rainfalls, when you get to Reb Yossi, he said on the 17th of Mar Cheshvan is the first rainfall, and the 23rd is the second rainfall. When you count from 17 to 23, you will find a span of 7 days. Whereas, according to the other opinions, you don't find that exact number, 7 days, between the first and second rainfall. So that when we ask what Reb Shimon Gamliel's comment regarding 7 days of rainfall will count as first and second rainfalls, the Gemara pointed out that is like Reb Yossi. But what's now the problem? After all is said and done, we were focusing on what was the point of having reference made to the second rainfall. It was Rabbi Zera himself said that has bearing for one who vows. And it sounds from what Rabbi Zera is saying, one who vows in any form whereby he makes reference to rainfall, even if he says ad hageshem. But what was said at the beginning of this second line from the bottom of Samach Beis Amid Beis, Rabbi Zera said there that the Tanaic controversy exists regarding vows until is it until the actual rainfall, or is it until the time of the rainfall? That is only if you use the expression ad hageshamim. But if you say ad hageshem, Rabbi Zera said it means until the time of Geshem, and with the exception of the Ran, all the Meforshim, and this is where the question really becomes very clear, all the Meforshim said ad Zman Geshamim meant until the time of the first rainfall. Here you see that if you use the term ad hageshem, it will take you till the second rainfall. As we underline just a few lines before the end of the question, so that knowing the date of the second rainfall is for someone who vows, even if he said ad hageshem, so that the vow will last, the prohibition, the self-imposed prohibition will last till the time of the second rainfall. That's not what Rabbi Zera said at the beginning of the sugya, namely that if one says ad hageshem, it means until the time of the first rainfall. The Gemara answers, Hahu di Omar ad hageshamim. The Rashi, where you see the star, Omar loch Rabbi Zera, Hai di Omar shnia l'noder, that which Rabbi Zera said, that knowledge of the date of the second rainfall has bearing for one who vows, Hainu di Omar ad hageshamim. Not like we thought that it's a reference to any form of rain reference in a vow, but specifically we use the language of ad hageshamim. The term geshamim is in the plural. That's tarti mashma. That implies two, the second rainfall. Omar ad hageshem. But if a person vows saying, I prohibit myself for whatever until the Geshem, in the singular, that is, as Rabbi Zera said initially, that's only until the vow will apply only until the time of the first rainfall, not the second. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.